The mahogany table gleamed under the sterile fluorescent lights of the law office, reflecting the tremor in my hands as I clutched my worn leather purse. 3 weeks. 3 agonizing, silent weeks since Arthur's funeral, and now here I was, at 63 years old, sitting in a room that felt less like a place of legal finality and more like a gladiatorial arena. Arthur, my husband of 42 years, had been gone for what felt like an eternity and a blink, leaving behind a silence in our sprawling Connecticut home that screamed louder than any noise. He was a man of quiet power, a self-made titan in the world of industrial design, renowned for his innovative, often revolutionary engineering solutions. His company, Sterling Innovations, had shaped skylines and modernized infrastructure across the globe. He was a visionary, a force of nature who moved through boardrooms with an unassuming grace that masked an iron will. I, Mary Sterling, had always been his quiet anchor, a retired university professor of architectural history, content to research forgotten blueprints and lecture on the evolution of urban landscapes. My world revolved around books, archives, and the intricate beauty of forgotten structures. Arthur had often joked that while he built the future, I preserved the past. Our marriage had been a tapestry woven with intellectual debate, shared passions for art and travel, and a deep, abiding respect. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were disagreements, moments of stubborn silence, and the inevitable ebb and flow of 2 strong personalities navigating a complex world. But there was always, beneath it all, an unbreakable bond, a bedrock of loyalty and affection. We understood each other on a level no one else ever could. Arthur's wit, often dry and understated, could make me laugh even in the direst of times. His unwavering support was the scaffolding upon which I built my own quiet career, giving me the freedom to pursue my passion without the constant pressure of financial worries. We built a life, not just a fortune, filled with antique maps, classical music, and the scent of old books. This was our legacy, a partnership that transcended the balance sheets and corporate victories. Our son, Daniel, was our only child. He inherited Arthur's keen mind, but none of his quiet resilience. Daniel had always been easily swayed, particularly by the allure of superficial success and the influence of strong personalities. He had drifted through various ventures after college, each one promising instant wealth, none ever delivering. He lacked Arthur's patience, his methodical approach, his inherent understanding that true success was built brick by painful brick, not by grand, fleeting gestures. His wife, Serena, was the antithesis of everything Arthur and I valued. A former reality television personality with an insatiable hunger for public attention and material possessions, she had swept into Daniel's life with the force of a perfectly coiffed tornado, remaking him in her image, twisting his malleable nature to her will. Her blonde hair was always impeccably styled, her designer clothes always on point, but her eyes, when they landed on me, were as cold and sharp as shards of ice. I saw the calculation there, the thinly veiled contempt for anything that didn't glitter. She was a woman who measured worth in carats and follower counts, a stark contrast to my world of dusty manuscripts and quiet contemplation. In the last year of Arthur's life, as his health slowly declined, Serena's visits to our home became more frequent, more intrusive. She would hover, her presence a jarring discord in our peaceful existence. She'd push for modernizing the household staff, suggesting new nurses who were more discreet, attempting to isolate Arthur from long-time employees who might notice her increasing control. She'd casually mention optimizing Arthur's financial portfolio, urging Daniel to get power of attorney, all under the guise of reducing stress for my ailing husband. Arthur, weakened by his illness, would simply sigh, his energy dwindling with each passing day. He trusted me implicitly, but even his formidable will seemed to falter under Serena's relentless honeyed manipulation. I watched, a quiet observer, as her influence grew, a chilling premonition settling in my heart. She was a predator, circling, waiting for the opportune moment to strike, and I was just the old lioness, guarding her fading mate, too weary to roar. My hands continued to tremble, a subtle quake that I hoped no one else in the room noticed. Across the polished table sat Daniel, my son. He wore a crisp, tailored suit that seemed to swallow him whole, and his eyes, usually quick to meet mine, now darted nervously, settling on anything but my face. He offered a weak, almost imperceptible smile, a fleeting gesture that spoke volumes about his discomfort. He chose a chair across from me, creating a physical and emotional distance that mirrored the chasm that had grown between us over the years, widened by Serena's insidious influence. Then, the door opened, and she swept in. Serena. She moved like she owned the very air in the room. Her designer dress, a stark black that cost more than my first car, rustling with her every confident stride. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face, giving her an almost predatory look. "Daniel, darling," she cooed, her voice a syrupy, sweet melody that grated on my nerves as she perched on the armrest of his chair, a manicured hand resting possessively on his shoulder. She glanced at me, her blue eyes, devoid of warmth, passing over me as if I were a ghost, an inconvenient specter in the room. "Mary," she finally uttered, the sound of my name, a barely veiled sneer, as if it were a distasteful word on her tongue. It was a calculated insult, a deliberate act of dismissal. I forced a smile, a brittle facade, determined not to let her see the raw wound her presence opened. Arthur had always been my buffer, the calm in the storm of Serena's ambition, somehow managing to maintain a semblance of peace between us. Without him, I felt utterly exposed, vulnerable to her carefully orchestrated cruelty. Mr. Albright, Arthur's longtime attorney, a kind man in his early 70s with a shock of white hair and a perpetually worried expression, entered the room, his worn leather briefcase clutched in his hand. He sat at the head of the table, his face somber, a silent acknowledgement of the weight of the occasion. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice a low rumble as he adjusted his thin-rimmed glasses. "I know this is a difficult time, but we need to address Arthur's final wishes regarding his estate." Serena leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with an almost unholy anticipation. "Of course, Mr. Albright," she purred. "We're ready to hear everything." The way she emphasized "we," as if Daniel and I were a single, united front, or more accurately, as if I didn't exist, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, suddenly feeling like an intruder in my own life, an unwelcome guest at the reading of my own husband's will. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, a prelude to the inevitable confrontation. I took a slow, deep breath, anchoring myself in the present, bracing for the storm I knew was coming. I was Mary Sterling, and I had faced down far worse than a manipulative daughter-in-law. Mr. Albright cleared his throat and began to read. As the familiar legal jargon filled the sterile air, my mind drifted, replaying snippets of the last year with Arthur. He'd become increasingly frail, his formidable mind clouded by medications and the relentless progression of his illness. Our conversations, once sharp and engaging, had become fragmented. He'd repeat himself, forget recent events. His eyes, once so clear and perceptive, often held a distant, confused look. Serena, sensing this vulnerability, had intensified her campaign, subtly, insidiously. She'd intercepted calls, controlled his visitors, even changed his medication schedule, claiming it was for his comfort. But in reality, it was to keep him sedated, compliant. I had watched, heartbroken, as the man I loved, the man who had built an empire with his intellect, was slowly, deliberately disempowered. I remember one particularly harrowing evening, about 2 months before Arthur passed. I'd found him in his study, a room he cherished, filled with his first edition engineering texts and a model of his first groundbreaking invention. He was staring blankly at a complex financial document, his brow furrowed, a pen clutched in his shaking hand. "Mary," he'd whispered, his voice weak, Did I sign this? It doesn't feel right." His eyes, usually so sharp, were clouded with confusion, and a sheen of fear coated his pallid skin. He looked lost, utterly adrift in a sea of numbers and legalese. Before I could truly examine the document, Serena had materialized at the doorway, a sweet smile on her face, a tray with his evening tea in her hands. "Oh, Arthur, darling, you shouldn't be troubling yourself with these old papers," she'd cooed, her voice a silken thread, as she gently, but firmly, removed the document and the pen from his grasp. "It's all taken care of. Daniel and I are just tidying up a few things for you. Don't you worry your head about it." She then steered him firmly towards his armchair, urging him to drink his tea, which seemed to almost immediately send him into a deeper state of drowsiness. I tried to talk to Daniel about it, to express my growing concerns about Serena's manipulative presence, about the way she seemed to be isolating Arthur. He just shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, you worry too much," he'd said, his voice flat, dismissive. "Serena's just trying to help Dad. He's not as sharp as he used to be. Someone needs to take charge." His words were a knife twist. Not just dismissing my worries, but dismissing Arthur's capacity, echoing Serena's insidious narrative. It was in that moment, seeing the complacency in my son's eyes, the way he had so easily fallen under Serena's spell, that a cold dread settled deep in my bones. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow, that I could not trust them. The attorney droned on, listing assets, the sprawling New England estate, the prestigious art collection, the private jet, the various investment portfolios. Serena nodded vigorously, interjecting occasionally with questions about specific valuations, her eyes alight with thinly veiled avarice. Daniel remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table, a picture of feigned disinterest that fooled no one. Then, Mr. Albright mentioned the primary residence. The primary residence on Elmwood Drive, along with the vacation property in Aspen, Colorado, will be. "Excuse me," Serena interrupted, her voice cutting through the lawyer's measured tones like a razor. She stood up slowly, deliberately, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, the sound a jarring shriek that seemed to announce her impending pronouncement. My blood ran cold, a familiar chill crawling up my spine. This was it, the moment I had dreaded, yet simultaneously anticipated. She turned to face me, her perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of cruel satisfaction, her blue eyes colder than winter ice. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here, Mr. Albright." I blinked, confused, though a terrifying clarity was beginning to dawn. "What do you mean?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. Serena's smile widened, a predatory, self-satisfied grin that sent shivers down my spine. "This meeting is for heirs only," she announced, her voice ringing with triumphant malice, designed to be heard, to inflict maximum humiliation. "Family members who actually have a legal right to Arthur's estate." The words hit me like a physical blow, a sudden, brutal punch to the gut. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. I felt the color drain from my face, a wave of nausea washing over me as the full implication of her statement sank in. Heirs only. She meant me. She was telling me, his wife of 42 years, that I was not an heir, that I had no right to be here, that I was, in her eyes, nothing. "I'm his wife," I whispered, my voice cracked, barely a breath. The injustice of it, the sheer audacity, was suffocating. "Were," Serena corrected, her smile hardening, a cruel, triumphant twist of her lips. "You were his wife, Mary, but now you're just someone who happened to live in his house." This discussion, she swept her hand dismissively towards the table laden with legal documents, is about real inheritance, about people who matter in the family business, people who built something. Her gaze was unwavering, filled with a malicious glee, as if she had just delivered the winning blow. I looked desperately at Daniel, my son, my only child. I waited for him to defend me, to stand up to his cruel wife, to tell her she was wrong, that this was an abomination. Instead, he stared down at his hands, his jaw tight, his face a mask of discomfort. Not embarrassment for Serena's cruelty, I realized with a fresh wave of pain, but embarrassment for me, for my presence, for my very existence in a room where he clearly believed I no longer belonged. "Daniel," I pleaded, my voice cracking, fragile with a lifetime of unspoken love and a sudden, raw heartbreak. "Please." He finally looked up, his eyes holding no warmth, no flicker of recognition for the woman who had raised him, who had sacrificed so much for his future. His gaze was cold, distant, a stranger's. "Maybe it would be better if you waited outside, Mom," he mumbled, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "This is really about the business assets and property transfers. It's complicated." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. My own son, the child I had carried for 9 months, had nursed through midnight fevers, had cheered for at every Little League game, was throwing me out like yesterday's garbage. 45 years of marriage, a lifetime of love and partnership, dismissed like I was some kind of gold digger, a parasite clinging to a fortune I hadn't earned. Mr. Albright looked appalled, his kind face contorted in a mixture of shock and dismay. "Now, wait just a minute. Mrs. Sterling has every right to be here." "Entitled to what?" Serena snapped, her voice rising, edged with a hysterical fury, as if his words had dared to challenge her authority. "She never worked a day in the family business. She never contributed anything except spending Arthur's money on her little hobbies. The real inheritance belongs to the people who actually built something." She flung her hand towards Daniel, as if he were the true heir, the rightful successor to Arthur's empire, a deserving recipient of every single penny. I stood on trembling legs, my whole body shaking with humiliation and rage. The room spun around me, a dizzying kaleidoscope of polished wood, cold faces, and the cruel, echoing laughter of my daughter-in-law. "Fine," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly strong, though every fiber of my being screamed in protest. "I'll wait outside." As I walked toward the door, each step a testament to my faltering dignity, I heard Serena's satisfied chuckle behind me. "Good. Now we can have a real conversation about the family's future." The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me out of the room, out of my life, out of my husband's legacy. I pressed my back against the cold wall of the hallway, the silence outside the conference room almost as deafening as the insults inside. The secretary at the front desk looked at me with open sympathy, but I couldn't bear her pity. I stumbled to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and finally, mercifully, allowed the tears to come, hot and stinging, burning tracks down my face. What had I done wrong? How had I become such a stranger to my own son? I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The familiar streets of our neighborhood blurred past as tears streamed down my face. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the house Arthur and I had shared for over 3 decades, I sat in the car for several minutes, unable to face going inside. The silence in the house was deafening. Everything reminded me of Arthur. His reading glasses still on the kitchen counter, his coffee mug in the sink, the newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle he'd never finished. It was a museum of a life, now empty, echoing with the ghost of a love I thought was eternal. But beneath the crushing weight of humiliation and grief, a tiny ember of defiance began to glow. They thought they had dismissed me, discarded me, relegated me to the forgotten corners of Arthur's life. They didn't know me. They didn't know Arthur. And they certainly didn't know the extent of our quiet preparation, the strategic foresight of a couple who had spent decades anticipating every possible contingency, every potential betrayal. You see, even in his final, fading months, Arthur had been many things, but he was never truly naive. His illness might have clouded his mind, but it hadn't erased his instincts, not entirely. He'd seen Serena for what she was from the moment Daniel brought her home, a charming opportunist, a social climber with an insatiable appetite for wealth. He'd tried, gently, to warn Daniel, to steer him away from her superficial allure, but Daniel, blinded by her beauty and relentless flattery, had been too lost to listen. Arthur, ever the strategist, had begun to lay plans, and I, his quiet, observant partner, had been privy to every meticulous detail. My own profession, architectural history, had trained me in the art of meticulous research, of uncovering hidden layers beneath seemingly simple surfaces, of understanding the foundations upon which grand structures were built. I saw patterns where others saw chaos, connections where others saw only coincidence. I applied this same forensic precision to our family dynamics, sensing the subtle shifts, the whispered agendas, the insidious erosion of trust that Serena orchestrated. About 5 months before Arthur's passing, he had called me into his study, his eyes, for a rare moment, clear and sharp. He'd held a thick, embossed envelope. "Mary," he'd said, his voice raspy, "this is important. More important than anything else right now." He explained that he'd had a new will drawn up, an ironclad document designed to protect his legacy, and more importantly, my future, from any potential machinations. He spoke of contingencies and protections, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "They won't see it coming," he'd whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. "They think they know how this story ends. They're wrong." He had always had a flair for the dramatic, even in his quiet moments. He had entrusted me with the only notarized physical copy, instructing me to keep it safe, hidden away, and to contact his most trusted, albeit discreet, legal advisor, Mr. Elias Thorne, if anything seemed amiss after his passing. Mr. Thorne was a formidable figure, known for his relentless pursuit of justice and his razor-sharp legal mind. He rarely took on new clients, but Arthur had a long-standing professional relationship with him, built on decades of mutual respect and shared ethical principles. Arthur had always valued integrity above all else. This was his final act of guardianship, his ultimate chess move, ensuring his life's work would not fall into the wrong hands. I had placed that envelope, heavy with the weight of Arthur's trust, in a custom-built, hidden safe behind a loose brick in the old fireplace in my private study, a secret only Arthur and I shared. We had installed it years ago, a relic from a playful phase where we imagined ourselves as characters in a spy novel, tucking away love letters and silly souvenirs. Now, it held the key to my future. I didn't contact Mr. Elias Thorne immediately after Arthur's passing. I grieved, quietly, privately. But as Serena's control over Daniel tightened, as she began to subtly liquidate some of Arthur's personal assets, claiming they were redundant or too sentimental for their modern tastes, the alarm bells began to clang. It was the little things. A painting of Arthur's grandmother that had hung in our foyer for decades, suddenly donated to a charity auction Serena favored. The sale of Arthur's beloved vintage car collection, a lifelong passion that she dismissed as old junk. These actions, small in the grand scheme of Arthur's vast estate, were telltale signs of a larger, more insidious plan. They were slowly erasing Arthur, piece by painful piece, rewriting his legacy to suit their own narrative of greedy entitlement. They were trying to erase me from his story. Then came the call from Mr. Albright, informing me of the will reading. Serena, it seemed, had already put her paw prints all over the current legal documents, having them notarized and rushed through, confident in her perceived victory. That was my cue. I called Mr. Elias Thorne. He was a man of few words, his voice gravely and precise. "Mrs. Sterling," he had said, his tone devoid of pleasantries, "Arthur informed me of certain eventualities. Do you have the document?" When I confirmed I did, he simply said, "Good. Be at Mr. Albright's office at precisely 10 a.m. I shall arrive shortly after the proceedings begin." He didn't need details. He knew Arthur, and he knew Arthur's family. He didn't need a long-winded explanation. He knew the game, and he was ready to play. So, here I was, moments after my public humiliation, standing in a sterile hallway, tears still streaming down my face. But the tears were now mixed with a potent cocktail of grief, rage, and a dawning, fierce anticipation. They had played their hand. Now, it was my turn. Suddenly, the heavy oak door to the conference room swung open with a soft sigh. Serena, her face flushed with victory, emerged, a triumphant smirk on her lips. She was probably coming to gloat, to witness my utter defeat. But before she could utter a single word, a tall, imposing figure strode past her, his presence instantly filling the hallway with an undeniable aura of authority. He was in his early 70s, his silver hair meticulously parted, his tailored suit exuding an air of quiet power. His eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses, were piercing, intelligent, missing nothing. This was Mr. Elias Thorne. Serena, caught off guard, stumbled backward, her triumphant smirk dissolving into a look of startled confusion, then dawning horror. Who are you?" she stammered, her voice losing its edge, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Mr. Thorne didn't even glance at her. His gaze was fixed on me, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement passing between us. He then turned to face the open door of the conference room, his voice, when he spoke, resonating with a quiet authority that instantly commanded attention. "Good morning, Mr. Albright. Apologies for my tardiness. I am Elias Thorne, here to represent Mrs. Mary Sterling in the matter of the late Mr. Arthur Sterling's estate." His words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Inside the room, Daniel, who had presumably been resuming his discussions with Mr. Albright, looked up, his jaw dropping. Mr. Albright, startled, pushed his glasses up his nose, his kind face registering a mixture of surprise and profound recognition. "Elias, what an unexpected pleasure," he stammered, clearly thrown off balance. Mr. Thorne stepped into the room, his movements deliberate, unhurried, as if he owned the very ground he walked on. He ignored Serena, who stood frozen in the doorway, her carefully constructed composure shattered. He ignored Daniel's gaping mouth. He simply walked to the head of the table, directly opposite Miss Albright, and placed a slim, embossed leather briefcase on the polished mahogany. The soft thud echoed in the suddenly silent room. He didn't even open it immediately. He simply stood there, his presence radiating an undeniable power, an aura of calm, dangerous competence. "This is outrageous!" Serena shrieked, finally finding her voice, a high-pitched, almost hysterical sound that cut through the silence. She stormed into the room, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "She's not allowed in here! Daniel just escorted her out! This is a private family matter!" Mr. Thorne finally turned, his piercing gaze sweeping over Serena, a cool, appraising look that seemed to strip away her carefully constructed facade, exposing the raw, ugly greed beneath. "Madam," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, utterly devoid of emotion, "your understanding of family matters and legal rights appears to be fundamentally flawed, Mrs. Sterling is not merely a guest here. She is the rightful executor and primary beneficiary of Mr. Arthur Sterling's estate, and I am here to ensure that his true, final wishes are not only honored but defended with the full force of law." He then opened his briefcase. Slowly, deliberately, he extracted a single, aged envelope. It was the very same envelope Arthur had handed me months ago, the one I had hidden in the fireplace safe. He laid it flat on the table, its embossed seal a stark contrast to the gleaming modern documents that had just been read. "Mr. Albright," Mr. Thorne continued, his voice unwavering, "I believe you will find this document to be Arthur Sterling's last valid will and testament, notarized and executed 11 months ago, well before his cognitive decline rendered him incapable of making such decisions. This document explicitly outlines his true intentions, leaving the entirety of his estate, including Sterling Innovations, the family residences, and all financial assets, to his beloved wife, Mary Sterling, with specific, minor bequests to certain charities and longtime employees, as well as a trust for his son, Daniel, contingent upon his demonstration of financial prudence and ethical conduct, and only upon his separation from his current spouse. Silence. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the room, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart. Daniel's face, which had been pale with embarrassment, now turned ashen, a sickly green hue replacing the color. His jaw, still hanging open, seemed to lose all tension, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He looked at Serena, then at me, then at the envelope, a deer caught in headlights. He finally understood the trap they had walked into, the depth of Arthur's foresight. Serena's reaction was more visceral, more theatrical. She let out a strangled gasp, a sound caught somewhere between fury and sheer disbelief. Her eyes, fixed on the envelope, bulged, and she took a step back, as if the document itself was a venomous snake poised to strike. No! She shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical crescendo. This is a forgery, a lie. Arthur would never, he hated her. He told me he was cutting her out of everything. This is impossible. She looked wildly at Daniel, as if seeking validation. A desperate, final grasp at her crumbling reality. Mr. Thorne remained impassive, his gaze steady, unwavering. Madam, we also have sworn testimony from independent medical personnel, supported by detailed medical records and physician's notes, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, indicating that Mr. Arthur Sterling exhibited severe cognitive decline, rendering him legally incapacitated for over 2 months prior to the execution of your so-called new will. Any changes made during that period are, by law, null and void. Furthermore, he continued, pulling out a thick file of impeccably organized documents, each one a nail in their coffin, we have comprehensive forensic financial logs detailing suspicious transactions and asset transfers initiated by you, Miss Serena Vance, and your husband, Mr. Daniel Sterling, during that same period. These transactions, made under duress and exploitation of a vulnerable individual, will now be subject to a full federal investigation for elder abuse and blatant financial fraud. I believe you will find the evidence, meticulously compiled, to be quite irrefutable. He laid out a complex diagram of shadowy offshore accounts, shell corporations, and suspiciously large, untraceable cash transfers. A digital breadcrumb trail I had painstakingly uncovered in the weeks following Arthur's death. Using the advanced cyber forensic skills I had cultivated in my former life as a digital archivist for the National Security Agency, a detail only Arthur had ever known, a secret life I rarely spoke of. Daniel finally found his voice, a choked, desperate whisper. No, Mom, you can't! His face was a contorted mess of fear and accusation, as if I was the one who had betrayed him. On the contrary, Daniel, I said, my voice calm, steady, infused with a power I hadn't felt in decades. My gaze was fixed on him, my son, the boy I had raised, now a stranger. I am merely ensuring your father's true wishes are honored, his final, lucid intentions respected. Unlike some, I don't need to rewrite history or prey on the vulnerable to get what I deserve. Your father left me a legacy, not just an inheritance, and I intend to uphold it. And I will not allow you or your wife to desecrate his memory with your greed. Mr. Albright, looking utterly stunned, was rapidly flipping through the documents Mr. Thorne had provided, his face growing paler with each page. He was a seasoned professional, and he recognized the ironclad nature of the evidence, the meticulous detail, the irrefutable truth. He looked at Serena and Daniel, then back at Mr. Thorne and me, his eyes now filled with a mixture of professional respect and a dawning sense of grim inevitability. I'm afraid, Mr. Thorne has presented compelling, irrefutable evidence, he stated, his voice now firm, authoritative, that calls into question the validity of this most recent will. Given the gravity of these accusations, the comprehensive financial documentation, and the damning medical reports, I have no choice but to recommend we proceed immediately with the prior will and initiate an immediate, formal investigation into the circumstances surrounding the alleged changes and the suspicious financial activities. This is beyond my office's jurisdiction now. This will require federal involvement. Serena let out a guttural scream, a primal sound of utter defeat and rage. She lunged forward, her hand outstretched as if to snatch the documents. But Miss Thorne, with surprising agility for a man his age, calmly placed his hand over the papers, blocking her. Daniel, meanwhile, slumped back in his chair, defeated, his face buried in his hands, utterly shattered. Their carefully orchestrated scheme had crumbled, exposed by the quiet woman they had underestimated, the mother they had tried to erase, the widow they had tried to strip bare. The ensuing legal battle was swift and brutal, a public spectacle that tore through Daniel and Serena's carefully constructed social image like a Category 5 hurricane. Arthur's email, his prior will, and the damning medical records, combined with the comprehensive forensic financial analysis I provided, A detailed map of their illicit activities proved to be an insurmountable wall of evidence. Serena and Daniel were forced to concede, their attempts to challenge the previous while falling flat against the mountain of irrefutable proof. The financial fraud charges against Serena and Daniel, stemming from the assets they tried to siphon off during Arthur's cognitive decline, led to a separate, equally humiliating federal investigation. Their reputations, built on a foundation of inherited wealth and superficiality, crumbled in the unforgiving glare of the media. Every news outlet, from the major networks to the online tabloids, dissected their downfall with morbid fascination. They learned, the hard way, that true power doesn't come from wealth or status, but from integrity and purpose. Their names, once synonymous with opulence and influence, became shorthand for greed and betrayal. For me, the victory wasn't about the money or the power of sterling innovations. It was about vindication. It was about honoring Arthur's true intentions, ensuring his legacy was built on innovation and ethical leadership, not greed and betrayal. It was about exposing the truth, even when that truth was painful and brought public scrutiny to my own family. I took the reins of Sterling Innovations, not as a ruthless corporate titan seeking to expand an already vast fortune, but as a strategic guardian. I restructured its divisions, redirected its vast resources towards ethical advancements in sustainable engineering and responsible urban development, aligning it with Arthur's original, more idealistic vision of using technology for human progress, not just profit. I established a new foundation, using a significant portion of the inheritance, dedicated to supporting caregivers and families dealing with cognitive decline, ensuring others wouldn't suffer the same exploitation Arthur did. It was a form of atonement, a way to mend the broken pieces of my husband's final years, to turn a personal tragedy into a force for good. My relationship with Daniel and Serena evaporated, replaced by a cold, permanent silence. They tried to salvage what they could of their social standing, but the taint of scandal clung to them like a shroud. I heard through hushed whispers that Daniel's attempts at new ventures collapsed, his reputation for weakness now viewed as incompetence, his former associates abandoning him. Serena's carefully curated social media empire imploded. Her sponsorships dried up, her perfectly constructed online life exposed as a fragile facade, her followers dwindling as her carefully engineered image disintegrated. She retreated from public life, her lavish mansion becoming her gilded cage, a monument to her greed and her ultimate defeat. They were left with the hollow shells of their ambition, stripped of the power they had so desperately craved. My life, once defined by quiet scholarship and intricate historical puzzles, transformed. I became a leader, navigating the complex world of corporate ethics and innovation. I learned that true strength wasn't about dominating others, but about standing firm in your convictions, protecting the vulnerable, and ensuring justice. I learned that family isn't just about blood, but about respect, honesty, and unwavering support, even when the relationship is complicated and fraught with unspoken resentments. The path to leadership was challenging, forcing me to step out of my comfort zone, to engage with people on a different level, to speak for those who could not speak for themselves. But it was a path I walked with purpose and integrity. And sometimes, the quiet ones, the ones underestimated and dismissed, are the very ones who hold the key to the truth, the ones who deliver the most profound lessons. My Arthur, in his final clarity, saw that. He left me the tools, the digital breadcrumbs, the quiet understanding of his true intent. And in his passing, he showed me, and the world, who I truly was, not just a wife, but a guardian, a force for justice, a woman who refused to be written out of her own story. The quiet moments with him, the ones they never witnessed or valued, were the ones that truly mattered, forging a bond stronger than any legal document or financial scheme. This story isn't just about a will or a family feud. It's about perception and reality, about the unseen battles fought in the quiet corners of lives, and about the unexpected power that lies within us when we choose to stand up for what's right. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or betrayed, remember that your quiet strength can be your most powerful weapon. Your integrity is your shield, and your truth, when revealed, can shatter the most carefully constructed deceptions. What you do in silence, the preparation, the observation, the unwavering commitment to your values often speaks louder than any public declaration. What battles have you fought that no one saw? How did you find your voice when others tried to silence you? Share your stories below, and remember to like and subscribe for more tales of resilience, unexpected triumph, and the quiet power of justice.